going to talk about today about international organizations and try to illustrate first of all the aim of the course and the overall questions that I'm going to raise according to international organizations, and then we'll go first of all international organization and classification, taxonomy if you like. Then we have a short history of international organizations, and finally a discussion of which I want to talk. And the second block, we're talking about theories and different concepts of international organizations in IR theories. Before I start my presentation and the slides, let me just briefly say a few words about myself. My name is, as you have seen, my name is Martin Koch. I'm from the University of Bielefeld in Germany. I studied political science and did in my PhD a kind of combination of using theories from organization studies in order to analyze autonomization processes of international organizations. In my second book or habilitation project, I dealt with international organizations in world society. So this is pretty much, or things I'm going to talk about is pretty much related to my research. All right. As I said, aim of the course, overall questions, then a typology, a definition of what international organizations are. Then we're talking about a short history of international organizations, and finally we'll have a discussion. By the way, when I say finally, I don't mean that if a question pops up or if you want to say something, just tell me, just raise your finger or just shoot, but you don't have to wait until we get to the fifth point. So whenever you want to say something, just go for it. Aim of the course. So what I want to do in this course, not only today, but in the course I'm hopefully teaching next winter, right, or next fall, is to develop a conceptual model alongside the four general roles of international organizations. They can be seen as instruments for states. They can be seen as arenas where major actors in particular states can negotiate. They can be seen as actors vis-a-vis states, so IOs can really act. And they might be seen also as bureaucracies or organizations in a more general sense. And these are four roles that are expressed in very different IR theories, and we are going to talk about this in, well, actually 2 hours basically. This model, this is the second step, this model shall be applied to analyze international organizations in selected policy fields, such as economy, security, development, and others. And studying the role of the EU as a supranational organization active in various policy fields is somehow the second aim of the course. And finally, and this is something I cannot do today, but I hopefully can do it next fall, finally, the students of the course should simulate negotiations within the United Nations Security Council. This is something I usually do in lectures in Germany or in, well usually I teach in Germany. That students are going to simulate discussions within the UN Security Council dealing with is actual problems that the Security Council is now debating, such as the war in Syria or the conflict in the eastern Ukraine or whatever, and where every student is resembling or putting the position of a certain member in the United Nations Security Council, such as the United States, China, France, Russia, Germany, Netherlands, and whatever. So the actual members in the Security Council should be simulated. But this is something I can hopefully do next year, but not today. The basic research question of this course is, what are the roles of international organizations in world politics, and how do international organizations shape world politics? So what kind of influence do international organizations have in world politics? These are 2 basic questions I'm going to address in my talk. So, what are international organizations? First of all, we have to deal with the term. the term international organizations or international organization singular means typically a kind of order of the international, or a kind of order of world politics. So this is the usual use of the term when you use it in the singular. If you use it in plural, it's typically a term that can have two meanings. Either it is a hypernym of all kinds of organizations beyond the nation state. This can include NGOs, multinational enterprises, civil society organizations, international governmental organizations, and so on. Or it could be used more specifically, just dealing with international governmental organizations. If you want to find out what an author means by using this term, you have to read very carefully, because it's not always expressed very clearly from the beginning. Here in this course, I'm primarily talking about international governmental organizations. So I'm not going into detail on NGOs or multinational enterprises or civil society organizations and so on. I could probably do that here and there in the talk, but my main aim is to deal with international governmental organizations and introduce international governmental organizations. So what is an international governmental organization? They can be defined as, and this is a citation or quote from Virelli, 1977, as an association of states established by agreement among its members and possessing a permanent system or set of organs whose task it is to pursue objectives of common interest by means of cooperation among its members. That sounds maybe a bit weird or complicated, but the most important thing is to remember three things that every international governmental organization needs to have. First of all, it is an association of states, or of subjects of international law, if you will. This is the more general description, to be a subject of international law. All states are subjects, but they have subjectivity of international law. There are, by the way, do you know which are the three non-state actors in international law? Any ideas? It's the International Red Cross, it's the Holy See, and the Maltese Order of the Knights. These three are the only non-state actors according to international law. But we can stick here to states as members. This is the first. The second is there needs to be an agreement among states. And this agreement is usually an international contract. If you don't have this international contract, this international agreement among the states, there's no international governmental organization. There can be an organization, but not an international governmental organization. And finally, you need to have a permanent system or set of organs. You need to have, so to speak, an address of the organization. Otherwise, there's no organization. Otherwise, it could be an international regime, having sets of contracts, having members, people belong to that regime, but you don't have an international organization. So these are the three things that are absolutely necessary for having an international organization. Association of states, international agreement, and a permanent system or set of organs whose task it is to pursue the objectives of the organization. By the way, it's sometimes disputed in the literature how many states an international organization must have at the minimum to be an international organization. Some say 2, others say 3. This is debated. Because some say if it's just 2 members, it's not international, it's just bilateral. So this is the argument why some say there must be at least 3 states, but this is not clearly expressed, or there is no agreement among this, but this is not really, well, how should I put it? This is not really an issue, because it's only important when it comes to counting international organizations. Then you need to have clear definitions. What is the minimum number of states to count something as an international organization? We're now going to somehow classify international organizations. There are different ways or different, say, approaches how to classify international organizations. One approach can be found by the Union of International Association. This is a yearbook, as the title says, or as it says, it comes every year, and it differentiates several types of international organizations. Those international organizations I'm dealing with are the 4 types listed here. Federation of international organizations, such as a principal membership category includes at least 3 autonomous international bodies. A universal membership organization membership covers at least 60 countries, regardless of distribution, or membership covers at least 30 countries and is equitably distributed over several continents. Intercontinental membership organizations having membership exceeds that of a particular continental region over at least 10 countries and is equitably distributed over at least 2 continents, and regionally defined membership organizations, membership and preoccupations restricted to a particular continental or subcontinental region or contiguous group of countries and covers at least 3 countries or autonomous international bodies. So this is just to show you this is a way how we can differentiate, how we can cluster different sorts of international organizations. This is a rather classical way to distinguish international organizations according to their membership. This slide gives you a brief idea of other ways how to differentiate international organizations. First of all, it's the oh, I'm so sorry. I'm switching always the slides here on my notebook. That works very well, but unfortunately I didn't switch them here. Maybe I should rather concentrate on this one. Constantine, I'm so sorry. So these again were the 2 questions I was talking about. Sorry for that. Well, I'm not going through the slides again. You have explained them already. But I probably should move over here. But so we have international organization in the singular, the meaning of order of the international. We have international organizations in the plural as a term having 2 meanings, either as a hyponym for each and every kind of organization among nation state, and international governmental organizations as those organizations I'm going to talk about. Then we have this definition I was talking about, the association of states, established by an agreement among its members and possessing a permanent system or a set of organs. So these are the 3 highlighted here in bold. These are the 3 main conditions that each and every international organization must have. Otherwise, it's not an international organization. By the way, most organizations fail to have the agreement. Most organizations fail to have the agreement. If there's not an international agreement, an international contract, there is no international organization. These organizations are then typically NGOs. By the way, member state or states could be members of an NGO, and if there's no international contract, it is still an NGO. These are the 4 types I was just talking about: the Federation of International Organizations, the Universal Membership Organizations, the Intercontinental Membership Organizations, and the regionally defined membership organizations. So these are the 4 rather bold types of international organizations by the Union of International Associations, and these types are differentiated according to their membership. And this is another idea, or another way how to differentiate international organizations. You can differentiate them according to their membership. This is basically done. This has been basically done by the Union of International Associations. They are differentiated according to their membership. According to membership, you can differentiate whether the membership is rather restricted or rather universal. Restricted membership is, for example, in international organizations where only certain countries that meet certain conditions can be a member. For example, in the European Union, South Africa cannot be a member. South Africa is not part of Europe, so it cannot be, regionally or continentally speaking, cannot be part of the European Union. Those states having no oil cannot be part of OPEC, the oil-producing countries organization. So these are certain conditions that some organizations have, others don't have, and only if you meet these conditions you can be a member, otherwise you cannot. Universal membership means each and every state could be a member. That doesn't have to say that each and every state is a member, but it could. So for example, WTO, the World Trade Organization, has no restrictions according to membership. So In principle, each and every country could be a member, but not each and every country is a member of the WTO. There's only one organization that has really universal membership. All countries in the world are members, well, basically members, which is, any idea?
Какая, ребята, универсальная международная организация, в которой практически все страны находятся? На английский.
United Nations.
United Nations, indeed. United Nations. It's the only organization having full universal membership. By the way, do I talk too fast?
No, it's okay.
It's okay? All right, good. So this is the first thing, the membership differentiation being either universal or restricted. The second is the competences. The competences can be comprehensive or issue-specific. As you can imagine, most international organizations have just an issue-specific competence. So, for example, WTO can only deal with trade issues, but usually cannot deal with environmental issues or human rights issues or whatever. But there are some organizations having rather comprehensive competences, which is the UN, of course, and which can also be regional organizations, such as the European Union, having rather comprehensive competences, but just for the members, so just for the European states. These two characteristics or ways how to differentiate international organizations, according to the membership and according to the competences, are very much state of the art. This is what you find basically in every textbook about international organizations. The other three, authority, function, and inclusiveness, are rather new ones. I would say the last three are characteristics that have been established within the last, say, 10 years in the research field of international organization. The interesting thing is that we don't know much about how, for example, authority might have an influence on the functions, or functions might have an influence on inclusiveness and so on. So the relations between authority, function, and inclusiveness are not very clear. So in case you look for a subject for your master thesis, or you want to go on and do a PhD, this could be an interesting field. Authority can be differentiated being either pooled authority, so the member states are still having the authority within the organization, and the authority just gets pooled in the organization, which is the case, for example, in the United Nations Security Council. The United Nations Security Council, the member states are still the authorities, but the authority gets pooled within the discussion and can be delivered into a decision. The authority is delegated in organizations where the organization has really the competences to do certain things, such as in the case of, I don't know, the World Bank, or the IMF, or the WTO. They have delegated competences to carry out certain tasks that are not carried out by the member states. You can differentiate international organizations according to their functions, whether they are rather program-oriented organizations or rather operational organizations. For program organizations, they develop, the organization develops typically a program, for example, having or giving money for small organizations, sometimes, or in many cases actually, the field of development for NGOs to do certain things. So they have a call for tender, these NGOs apply for the money, and then the NGOs do carry out the work, but the program behind the work has been developed by international organizations. This is typically for program international organization. Operational organizations are carrying out the very operations by themselves. And finally, we can differentiate international organizations according to their inclusiveness. They can either be open for other actors, such as NGOs, having sometimes an observer status within organizations, or at least participating in negotiations in international organizations, or they can be rather closed. Closed means that only members can participate. Other actors are excluded. So these are basically the 5 ways how to differentiate international organizations. As I said, the membership and the competences. These are the 2 things. It's basically the mainstream differentiation of international organizations, whereas authority, function, and inclusiveness are rather new ones. And this is a typical way how international organizations are then differentiated if we, or organized, if we differentiate them according to their membership and their competences. You have here, for example, in the universal membership, but in the universal competences, you have here right up the United Nations. You have a little bit lower because there are still a lot of competences, but not the full comprehensive competences as in the UN. You have the IBRD, you have the UNRWA, you have the WTO. Then you have here issue-specific organizations like UNESCO, IMF, ILO, FAO, and so on. You have here the issue-specific organization but restricted membership, such as African Union here. Well, probably NATO should be better placed here, having restricted membership and just restricted competences. But you also have, as I've said, restricted membership but comprehensive competences up here in the right, the European Union, all the OECD, and so on. So this is a way how to organize international organization according to this differentiation. And this is a typology you can find, or this is derived from a book, an introductory book on international organization by Littberger, Zangen, and Koch. So this is basically, or was basically, the typology. Are there any questions so far on the typology, taxonomy, and the definition of international organization?
Ребята, есть вопросы именно по классификации, по понятию?
Question, then let's go on. So, the basic question is, why do we need international organizations at all? Why is there a need for international organizations? At least 2 questions, or 2 answers can be given here. First of all, there's an increasing number of global problems, such as global warming, international terrorism, global financial crisis, and so on. And these problems cannot be managed by one state or even states alone, but require cooperation between different states and non-state actors such as international organizations. This is a rather modern explanation of why international organizations are needed. In the beginning, so in the middle of the 19th century, international organizations were founded to facilitate and enhance international cooperation. And this is what I'm talking about right now, about the history of international organization. Basically, the history of international organization starts with the history of international relations. And international relations typically start after the Treaty of Westphalia. By the way, Münster and Osnabrück are 2 towns in Germany which are very close to Bielefeld. It is sometimes called the 3 cities, Münster, Osnabrück, and Bielefeld are sometimes called the rain triangle because there's so much rain between these 3 cities. The Treaty of Westphalia has been closed in 1648, ending the 30 Years' War of Religion. This is a picture taken from the final ratification of the Treaty of Westphalia. The Treaty of Westphalia and the Treaty of Utrecht, which was a city in the Netherlands, established an international, well, it should be saying ordering, not ordering, principle. The principle of sovereignty. The notion of sovereignty starts really after the end of the 30 Years' War, because it established territorial integrity and the right to conduct domestic and foreign affairs without intervention. A horizontal, usually you should see here not a square but an arrow. A horizontal international order of formally equal states has been established within or by the Treaty of Westphalia. Before the Treaty of Westphalia, we we had conflicts between different reigns, between different houses, between different regions, in particular according to their religion. And this Treaty of Westphalia ended this religious war and established instead of that a horizontal international order of formally equal states. So each and every state or region accepts other regions. And this is quite important because somehow the system has been changed from a hierarchical system to an egalitarian or equal system. I'm not saying that each and every country or state is equal to the other. There are more powerful and less powerful states, of course. But these states are formally still sovereign states. So in some international organizations, it doesn't matter whether the United States is sitting on the table or Burkina Faso, because each country has the same vote. This is not true for every international organization. We have different kinds of, but in some, such as, for example, the WTO or the United Nations General Debate, it doesn't matter whether you are the United States or Burkina Faso, you have all the same rights. You have just one vote. And there's no weighting in the votes. The rights of states as political units was the central precondition for establishing international organizations. Without states as political units, or without political units as a general term, there can be no international organization because there can be no members. IOs, however, appeared later in the 19th century when further conditions arose. First of all, there has to be sufficient contact between the states, and secondly, there has to be a recognition of problems due to interdependencies of states. So these are the two conditions, otherwise there won't be any international organization. First of all, you have to have a certain amount of contact between the states. For example, if there would be no contact between states such as, I don't know, take for example Russia and Ukraine, or Russia and Poland, or Russia and Germany. Let's take Russia and Germany. If there would be no contact whatsoever between the two countries, so no economic contact, no, I don't know, cultural contact, nothing, there would be no reason to have an agreement on something. There would be no reason to have an organization that is dealing with certain issues or problems that occur due to the interdependence or due to the exchange between the countries. So only if you have a certain amount of contact between countries, there is a need, because of the overlaps, there is a need to deal with certain issues, with certain regulations between countries. The second is there has to be the recognition of problems due to the interdependence of states. And the place where this arises, first of all, was in the field of economy, as you can imagine. So the first international organization ever was the International Organization for the Navigation on the River Rhine. This is the river, you probably know the Rhine, so the river going through Europe, basically, to different countries of Europe, and they have to find a solution for all this traffic station, for all these tariff stations on the Rhine. There have been more than 30 tariff stations on the Rhine in the beginning of the 19th century, and this was a real problem, because if you send a ship from down the Rhine to the upper end, or the other way around, and it has to stop at 30 stations paying tariffs, and then it can go on. It takes a lot of time. And in order to have trade more smoothly and to be able to lay down this kind of burden, barriers, international organizations have been found, and the International Organization for the Navigation on the Rhine was the first of them. And it was founded after the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and later with the Charter of Mannheim in 1846. The basic idea, by the way, of the Congress of Vienna was to provide This is another field where international organizations or ideas about international organizing arose. The basic idea was to provide a long-term peace plan for Europe by settling critical issues arising from the French Revolution wars and the Napoleonic Wars. The Congress of Vienna is important for two reasons. First of all, the diplomatic foundations for European security. So the idea to have diplomatic exchanges, or in the second point, regular meetings between states representatives, and not just in the wake of war. In former times, there were exchanges, there were representatives meeting, but just in the wake of war. This idea after the Congress of Vienna was to have this kind of regular meeting, of regular diplomatic exchanges. Also as an idea to prevent wars, to prevent conflicts between states. The Congress system and the Council of Europe, established by the Congress of Vienna, meant that statesmen realized that there are common issues among states that need to be settled to avoid wars. So the idea changed from just dealing with conflicts and dealing with wars and having then diplomatic relations to prevent wars, prevent conflicts by exchanging on a diplomatic level right beforehand. And the most far-reaching conferences here were the Hague Peace Conference from 1899 and 1907. This idea was to establish there panels to settle international disputes. So it was basically the first idea of something like the United Nations or the League of Nations that happened in the Hague Peace Conferences. Okay. In other areas, so this was the field of security. In other policy fields, international organizations emerged as a response to technological changes in such as transportation, like steamships and railroads that were invented, or communication, like the telegraph. The Central Commission for the Navigation on the Rhine, I talked about this. There were other commissions for navigation, such as on the River Elbe, on the Danube, the Congo and the Niger. So it's not just European rivers, but also rivers in Africa. We have the International Telegraphic Union from 1865, or the International Bureau of Weights and Measures. These international organizations basically are still working, so we're not talking about organizations that ceased after some time. They are still in place and they are still working. This is also true, by the way, for the Commission for the Navigation of the Rhine. They don't have much to do there, but still the organization exists. The ultimate purpose of these early ILOs was to facilitate international trade by establishing market rules and standardization. ILOs were seen as administrative means and not as ends in itself. So this is another basic understanding of international organization, and we should see that in the roles of international organizations in about 1 hour. That ILOs were not seen as ends in itself. They were not conceptualized as actors, as really doing something, but they were conceptualized, they were built as means, as some kind of help for member states. Just to deal like a machine, just to deal with a certain problem, at a certain time for the actors, to make life easier, so to speak, to make life easier for states. This was the basic idea. So there is not an idea or an understanding behind to have some kind of, I don't know, world government or something by international organizations. International organizations were just conceptualized as means, as administrative means for states. Then we have the League of Nations, which is another big step from 1990. And here we see where the heads of states and diplomats met at the Versailles Peace Conference to create a global security ILO. So after the First World War, there was the idea that we should have an international organization that is preventing further wars. This is an idea mainly developed by Woodrow Wilson, the former American former American president. The interesting thing is, although, just point 3 here on the slide, although Woodrow Wilson was a chief proponent and architect of the idea of the League of Nations, the United States never joined the League of Nations. So the president had the idea, the president was the highest proponent of this idea, but the United States was never a member. The League of Nations was the first attempt doing a collective security operating on the notion of all against one. This is very important here. The idea here was with the League of Nations to have an organization where each and every state is willing to, or in principle, is willing to fight against the one state that is taking military actions against any other state. So it's not the idea you can only defend yourself if you are attacked. The idea was here with the League of Nations, if any states get attacked by another state, all the other states of the League of Nations will attack the offender. This was the basic idea. So according to Article 16, all member states were required to come to aid of member being victim of military aggressions. The Versailles Peace Conference is also known for widespread participation by both state and non-state actors, which is something not absolutely new. We had that already in the peace conferences in Hague, but the League of Nations is probably the most popular event where state and non-state actors met after the First World War, which led, for example, to the foundation of the International Labour Organization, which is a tripartite membership organization. This is important here, or this is, well, maybe not important, but it's interesting here. We have here an international organization with the International Labour Organization that does not only have members as their representatives, but also representatives from employer and employee organization. So in the International Labour Organization, each state or each country is represented by 4 people or 4 votes. 2 votes coming from the states, 1 vote from the employer and 1 vote from the employee organization. This is the way how the International Labour Organization is organized. And this idea gets back, or comes back to the Versailles Peace Conferences and to the participation of not only states but also non-state actors. As I've said, even though Woodrow Wilson was a chief proponent and architect of the League of Nations, the United States never joined. And as we all know, the League of Nations failed to prevent wars. Some wars already started while the League of Nations was still in place, so such as Japan's invasion of Manchuria or Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, which led to the Second World War. So even if Germany, for example, was a member of the League of Nations, the members of the League of Nations didn't comply or didn't follow the Article 60. And this is, by the way, something that we will find when we're talking about the roles of international organizations in, I don't know, half an hour or 45 minutes or whatever we have left. When we're talking about the roles of international organizations, there is this idea of seeing international organizations as instruments for states. And this basic idea is that even if states agree on certain principles, on certain rules, does not mean that they have to follow these rules. It is basically the same as rules you have all over the world. For example, if the flashlight shows a red sign for you, usually most people stop, but not each and everybody stops. Some just walk over the street, even if the flashlight shows red. And sometimes there's no punishment. If no policeman is standing around and you didn't get hit by a car, then nothing happens. And this is basically the same idea, the same understanding in international organizations. You have these rules, and most of the states, at least some of them, comply to the rules, but others don't. But there's no higher policeman. The international system is an anarchic system. I'm talking about this later on, but this is the basic, this is one basic understanding in most IR theories, that the international system is an anarchic system. There is no overall rule, there is no overall order. There's only the order that the people or the states establish. And some of them follow the rules and the principles and the norms and the values, and others don't. Nevertheless, even though the League of Nations is, well, in most articles, in most books, the League of Nations is seen as a failure, as a mistake in preventing war and securing peace. And this is probably true. It was a failure when it comes to preventing wars, but nevertheless, the League of Nations is an important, very first step for an international order by an institution with universal membership. The idea to have such an institution that is in principle able to prevent wars is something that has been invented about 100 years ago. Okay, then we come to the establishment of IOs in the post-World War II era. The establishment, in particular, of the United Nations system was decided by the US, the UK, the Soviet Union, and China at Lambert Oath. And these four, interestingly enough, these four have been seen not just as the winning countries of the Second World War, but also as the four policemen. So these four countries should decide whether military action is justified or not justified. This is the order of the United Nations that has been developed or established right after the Second World War. Then France joined this group of four, so they are now five. But these five members are the five veto members within the UN Security Council, as you probably know. The Charter of the United Nations was signed in 1946 in San Francisco by the five permanent members, as I've said, the United States, the UK, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, now Russia, China, and France, and a majority of the other 46 states. And other states later joined, so this is the only international organization we have with full universal membership. The principle here is abstinence from unilateral use of force. This is the basic principle of the United Nations. And as I said, the four, respectively five, permanent members and veto members of the United Nations Security Council are those actors that are observing and deciding whether unilateral use of force is justified or unjustified. The Security Council has the primary responsibility for authorizing and overseeing military actions. The United Nations, I'm just talking very briefly about this, the United Nations is divided into 6 principal organizations. We have the General Assembly and non-compulsory recommendations that gives non-compulsory recommendation to states or suggestions to the Security Council. We have the UN Secretariat, which is the administrative support to all UN bodies, such as in, for example, writing reports, collection and distribution of information and so on. So this is the basic job of the UN Secretariat. We have the UN Security Council, which is responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security and decisions on compulsory resolutions. So this is, well, I would not say the most important, but clearly a very, very important body of the United Nations. And this is why I'm focusing on the United Nations Security Council for the simulation, which is hopefully taking place in about a year. Then we have the International Court of Justice that decides disputes between states. We have the Economic and Social Council, which is responsible for cooperation between states on economic and social matters. And we have the Trusteeship Council, which is inactive right now because it was originally designed to manage colonial possessions that were former League of Nations mandates. So after the Second World War, we still have former colonies, and these colonies were dealt with or managed by the Trusteeship Council. All right. Besides the organs of the UN system, Besides the organs, the UN system encompasses a myriad of functional agencies and organizations. So we don't have only these 6 bodies, but many more others, such as the International Labour Organization. I was talking about this a few minutes ago, which is dealing with labor rights, labor security, and so on. For example, also things like maternal leave and so on. This is basic ideas established by the International Labour Organization. However, this is another interesting thing. The International Labour Organization does not decide about, say, labor security, labor rights, maternal leave regulations, and so on. This is typically done by the states, but the recommendations are given by international organizations, and these international organizations, well, then these states usually refer to international organizations according to new regulations and national laws. We have the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, the UNESCO, which contributes to peace and security by promoting international cooperation through educational, scientific and cultural reforms. We have, for example, the World Health Organization, which is which deals with communicable and non-communicable diseases. We have the Food and Agriculture Organization, contributing to the eradication of hunger by facilitating policies and political commitments to support food security. And we have the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees that is responsible for protecting refugees, forcibly displaced communities and stateless people, and assist in their voluntary repatriation. So these are only 5 other organizations or 5 other fields in which international organizations are active, like labor, education, in scientific and cultural, in health, in food and agriculture, in refugee and migration stuff. So we have very different fields in which international organizations are active. And we have also international organizations in the economic system, such as the World Bank, on economic development and post-war reconstruction, the International Monetary Fund, to foster global monetary cooperation, secure financial stability, and facilitate international trade, and reduce poverty in the long run. And we have the World Trade Organization, former GATT, with rules and principles for trade, non-discrimination, dispute settlement mechanism, and so on. So these are, again, international organizations now from the field of economy that are establish another branch of international organization in the field of economy and finance. Further on, we have in this phase in this period after the Second World War, we have a rise of regional IOs, such as the Organization of American States, the Arab League, the Organization of African Unity, we have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, we have the Warsaw Treaty Organization, we have the European Union, and a large number of other regional IOs in diverse policy fields, mostly trade, economic development, and finance. And today, this is some kind of preliminary observation, preliminary finding, there seems to be no global policy field left in which at least one IO is actively involved. And if a new policy field pops up, it is usually a question of 1 or 2 years that we have an international organization in the field. So for example, one of the rather recent international organization, or really global organization with a universal membership, is the International Organization for Renewable Energy. A new issue pops up like the renewable energy, then we have an international organization. It's called IRENA, if I'm not mistaken. So this graph shows you the development of IOs from 1850 to 2000. What you can see here is it's usually after the wars when the number of international organizations gets higher. We have it here after the First World War, and in particular after the Second World War, the number of international organizations rises very significantly. And what we, by the way, can observe too is that it depends on how you count international organizations, but that the number of international organizations is here limited more or less to 350. Again, it depends on how you count, whether you count organizations with having just 2 member states or if you start counting only by 3 member states. But there are not much more than these 350 right now, due to the fact that the number of regional international organizations, well, I wouldn't say stops, but it's not increasing that fast as it has in the past. And this is probably one of the last slides here. This slide shows you both the development of international, shows you in particular the development of non-governmental organizations. While we have here a number of, as I said, about 350 international organizations, depending on how you count. We have here a number of more than 4,000 NGOs, and I'm pretty convinced that this number is growing significantly in the future. And we see that the acceleration starts in the 1990s. Not, as I've said, for international governmental organizations. You can here see the rise after the Second World War. Here the rise started in particular from the 1990s, 1995. Then the rise of NGOs really peaks. All right, this is basically the presentation for the first block. Are there any questions? No questions. Shall we go on with the discussion? Do you want to discuss the questions or?
Преподаватель предлагает обсудить следующие вопросы. Are you ready? No. Let's take part. Let's try to discuss.
Let's try to discuss. Okay. Then I suggest we start with the first question. Do you have any idea why we observe phases of IO formation after wars? Why after the first, but more important, after the Second World War? Why is the number of international organizations rising after wars? Do you have any idea?
Вопрос понятен, да?
It's probably not. It's probably not a question of being right or wrong.
А почему рост международных организаций наблюдается прежде всего после войны? Почему?
Потому что люди осознали, что без организации мы не сможем. Because we already had that problem of the war, so we need another place to agenda setting in the international relations.
Right.
So we have to form new international organization to solve the problem that have occurred during the war or previously.
Or previously, exactly, that lead to the war in the first place.
Yes.
That is one very important reason for building international organizations. Another is, and this is a very, say, basic, probably human fact. People were sick of war. People were sick of fighting and dying. They just want rather another way to settle conflicts, another way to
More
some
diplomatic.
kind of more diplomatic, indeed, yeah, more diplomatic, more peaceful. They just want another way, and were simply sick of going to war. This is in particular. This was true after the First World War, and it was in particular true after the Second World War. And this is exactly the period. This is exactly the phase when states decided we have to look out, we have to hold out for other ways. It cannot be the way that every country first. It cannot be. Forgive my daily politics. It cannot be America first. It cannot be just one country first. It has to be somehow multilateral. We have to work together. We have to deal with our problems. Otherwise, it might lead to another war. And this was something that people, not just states, but this was something that people really realized and pushed their states to form international organizations. This is one motive.
To prevent future like such
Yeah.
struggles, so that's why you can see which points are getting more like hot, and you try to discuss them on the international level to prevent it from getting to the like stage of crisis.
Indeed,
so
yeah.
That leads to the war.
Yeah, indeed. And sometimes it's also the other way around. Sometimes you don't start with the hot topics. Sometimes you start with the cold topics, with the easy ones to deal with. So in some cases you start with a kind of economic cooperation, because this is much easier to find a solution in economic terms than in security terms, for example. And it's easier because all countries won't win, right? There are comparative advantages in each and every country to produce certain products, and each and every country can win if they exchange. If they agreed on certain rules, how to exchange goods, what are the tariff barriers or the non-tariff agreements or non-tariff bindings on conditions on international trade. This is something that countries can usually rather quickly agree upon. And then if you have an agreement in one particular policy field, sometimes this spills over to other policy fields. So sometimes from the policy field of economic cooperation, then issues of, say, labor rights pop up, or issues of environment pop up. Because you think, well, this product is, I don't know, manufactured in a certain country, but this has really consequences for the environment. Let's do it another way. So sometimes other questions emanating somehow from the economy pop up in other fields. And one theory or one understanding of international institutions is that if you have very close cooperation, at least one field, it would be very harmful to have a war afterwards, because it would harm, for example, in the field of economy, it would harm all the economic relations you already have, and it would harm the economy of a state. So it is not cost sensitive to engage into a war. So this is basically the explanation for IO formation after wars. But mostly, the most of them are established within the family of UN, and then we have the post-Cold War period. Do you see any continuities or differences between these three phases?
Maybe that the economic organizations still matter, and but we get new new problems like global warming or something, and different problems. If we compare to the 19th century and 20th century, now we have new questions to solve. But still, economics matters.
Okay.
War matters, and that's how it all goes. And what I could say that in the 21st century, the only organization that is like almost every person knows is the United Nations, and there is no other organization that have so many different approaches connected in one organization. They have too many departments that solve problems starting from the maternity to the ecological problems, from the problems with water and food, and so they cover all the range of problems in the global world. So it looks like this organization has no other alternative nowadays.
Okay.
So this may be the difference.
Okay. Well, you mentioned very many points. So just to sum up, first of all, economy still matters. Economic international organizations still matter. Second, that is the commonality between the three periods. Then we have the difference that new policy fields pop up, in particular in the 21st century. That is one thing you mentioned. And finally, which is also something new, is that the United Nations system is somehow, well, not the overall system, but seems to be the most important because it's dealing with so many different issues. It's not an issue specific, but it's really a universal international organization. These are 3 interesting points. Can we find more? Is there anything else? Okay, then let's raise another question. Is there any organization that can prevent war or wars? It was always the idea international organizations should be built in particular, maybe not in the 19th century, but in the 20th century, definitely in the 21st century as well. International organizations such as the League of Nations or the United Nations, in particular the United Nations Security Council, is there to prevent war or wars. Are international organizations preventing wars? Simple question. Doubtedly. Well, you can easily say no, they are not preventing wars. Because we observe wars, there have been wars, they are not preventing wars. There is, international organizations are not the overall policemen. They cannot prevent wars. It's still the state, or still the states that decide about going to war.
States might stop wars in the regions they are interested in, but there is no structure that can hold the leading states from starting the war. There is no alternative to United States of America because they their invasion of democracy can be stopped by other means because it sometimes is led by the flag of humanitarian help and etc. etc. And if we speak of the China, the same thing. They have their own ideology that can't be stopped by international
this is
order. So that's why we can't say that there is the structure that we hold, because every structure is constructed by people, and people are not always ethically and morally stable and good. So that's why it often shifts.
This is the empirical correct observation. I totally agree. It's empirically correct that no state can, for example, or that states do not stop, for example, the United States from going to war. But in principle, it would be possible. I'm not saying, or I wouldn't argue that this is impossible. States cannot be ruled or states cannot be regulated. I would argue they can. But there is no such thing because all the other states haven't agreed upon being, for example, attacking an aggressive state or a state that's going to war. There are good reasons for that. I'm not arguing on a moral level or on a normative level. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that this is empirically you are totally right. And when we look at world politics right now, we can see that there's no such thing as an overall policeman or an overall order that is preventing wars. But in principle, it is possible. It's not something that is impossible. It can be done. I'm not saying that. Well, it is debatable whether it should be done or should not be done, but it could be done. This is the thing. Okay, and finally, let's go to the third question. Can I also do more than just facilitate interstate cooperation? And if so, if we can do so, how? This should be the basic thing that you should take away or take with you as a takeaway message, that IOs were founded in particular to facilitate interstate cooperations. So what we have basically is states that are equals. After the Treaty of Westphalia, states are treated as equals, no matter how powerful they are. The United States is as important as Russia, as important as China, as Germany, as France, Burkina Faso, El Salvador, and whatever you have. No matter how powerful the state is in reality, they are equally important because they are sovereigns. International organizations pop up just because there are interactions between all these states in the world. And the primary job of international organizations is to deal with these interstate problems or with these interstate linkages between states. That has not necessarily to be a problem, but there's a kind of issue between, or linkage between the states. And these linkages, these connections between the states are dealt with by international organizations. But the primary actors, according to this understanding, are still the states. Can you think of other tasks or functions of international organizations that go beyond this facilitation of interstate cooperation? Can you think of any example you might have in mind about an international organization that is going beyond that?
Maybe we should talk about some certain organizations. The question is to be, I mean, there is no non-governmental organizations which is not about interstate cooperation at all. Maybe I don't understand the question correctly, but can you rephrase it maybe?
Yeah, I can try at least to rephrase it or reformulate the question. My question is, do international organizations just facilitate cooperation among states, or do they sometimes do more than that? Or to put it in other words, are international organizations just means or instruments for interstate cooperations, or can they be more than that?
Of course, they are more than just interstate cooperation. So,
okay, then do you have an example or?
I don't know, something in medicine or in culture, for example. Maybe some organization which link business. So.
Okay.
Ребята, объясните, в чем сложность вопроса.
Just wants to be so far.
И при этом не занимаются этим вопросом.
То есть НГО это They could, but there's no exact, like, example that they do. So maybe there are some, like, I think that
Okay.
in some international organization, interstate cooperation, they have some policies that touch the sphere of cultural, medicine, and other, but they still are interstate. I don't know how to explain it, but they interstate cooperation means that you, on the level of the power, they decide some policy vectors that will be implemented in the international order or in exact countries. So they could have been more, but it is still on a high level. I don't know how to explain. Every change in the state policy means that somebody who sits up high decided so and gave the financial support and constructed structure, how to lead it, how to make it. So if we say that it might be something more than just interstate cooperation, we mean that we include structures of civil society. And if we speak of interstate cooperation, it's still always the decision of upper level. I don't know how to explain it.
But what do you mean by upper level right now?
Upper level, I mean the people who make decisions.
The states, you mean, or what do you mean by
people who construct the policy of the state? It's still the people do that. Still the people who in the apparatus of power. So interstate cooperation means that you by political means you create the policy in a different sphere. So like in social sphere, in economic sphere, in ecological sphere, but it's still the government decision.
Yeah.
It's still the political mean.
Okay, this is true for some, probably for many international organizations, but not for all international organizations. Just to give.
There could be more, but can't say the exact example.
Okay, then let me give you a few illustrations, because this is exactly the bridge that I'm going to build to the next part of the lecture. An example could be, for example, probably the best example for that is the European Union. This is the only international organization that has really supranational elements, like the European Commission or the European Court of Justice. This is an international organization, or this is under the term international organization, but it's really supranational. It is beyond the states. The European Union can force states to do something, and if the states don't comply, there is no way out, and they have to quit their membership in the long run. But this is something that the European Union can do. Now you could say, well, the European Union is an exception because this is a really unique international organization. It's not something that...
The European Union includes that you give some part of your sovereignty to the upper level, so that's why it's not... Exactly. The European Union, usually it works like this, that I told you or talked about this when we were talking about competences and authority of international organization. Usually it goes like this, that states give some of their competences to an international organization to carry out certain functions just for the states. In case of but the states still have the competence to set competences. So the state can decide whether it gives competences away or it gets them back. In the case of the European Union, this is a unique example because the European Union has the power to set their own competences in certain fields, not in each and every field. So when it comes to foreign policy, the European Union hasn't that power, but in certain fields, for example, when it comes to consumer rights, when it comes to telecommunication and things like that, the European Union can set its own competences. It's not given from the member states. But this is a unique example. I try to give a second example, which is a more general one, because I think that I'm convinced that international organizations can do more than just facilitating interstate cooperation, and sometimes they do more, even if this task is not delegated by states. An example for this is actually the United Nations High Commission one example is the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, because this organization defined the term refugee. The term refugee it existed in the language before, but there wasn't a clear definition. For example, if I'm standing here in Russia, I cannot be a refugee in Russia because there's no political aggression in my home country against me. So I can easily go back to my home country and I will not go into jail in my home country or whatever. My life is not in danger if I go back to Germany. So I cannot be a refugee. I could only be a refugee by two conditions. First of all, my life must be harmed by the state in which I'm living or by my home state,
or there is a political aggression against my convictions in my home country. And the second is, I am out of my home country. I cannot be a refugee in my own country. That doesn't work. So a refugee has to meet two conditions. There must be a harm or a threat to your life, and you have to be out of your country. Otherwise you cannot be a refugee. And this kind of definition is, for example, established by the UNHCR. And this definition has consequences. If somebody is identified as a refugee, the UNHCR can principally act. They can act, and they can give, for example, money. They can help states to develop housing, to develop educational programs, and so on. You're right, it is still the states, or the state, that is doing the most of the work, but UNHCR can give money, can only give money or intellectual support or help if people are recognized as refugees. Otherwise, there would be no chance. So even if your life is in danger in your home country, even if you are suppressed by your own state, but you are still living in that state, UNHCR can do nothing. Because still the state is dealing with this. And this is just one example how an international organization can define categories and define certain measures that are combined with the categories international organizations are defining. This is just one example. I'm talking about other examples later on. But these are just to illustrate. These are different ways how international organizations can be seen. And this is exactly why I think that the theories or the concepts we have on international organizations or our understanding of international organizations should be broadened up. We cannot think about international organizations just in terms of instruments or means. They are different things, or can be different things. They can be arenas, they can be actors, they can be bureaucracies or general organizations. And depending on what organizations we focus, depending on what policy field we focus, depending sometimes even on what particular point in time we focus, we see different roles international organizations are playing. And this is something like a teaser for the next session. I suggest, Konstantin, up to you a bit, but I suggest we have, I don't know, 10 minutes break. Is that okay for you?
10 minut.
Done? Okay. Relations. I'm not quite sure how much international relation theories you know, or how much you know about international relation theories. So I'm not starting with the very basic things, but I try to guide you along the way to international organizations and certain metaphors of international organizations. So this is basically what I'm going to do. I'm talking first of all very generally about IOs and IR theories. Then I'm talking about IOs as instruments and arenas. Then we have a short discussion about these two terms, and then we go on with international organizations as actors and bureaucracies, and afterwards again discussion. By the way, every slideshow is ended by 1 or 2 slides with different references. So in case you are interested in these kind of stuff, in these theories, you can read alongside the mentioned references for, I don't know, exam papers or your master's thesis or whatever. So from the beginning of IR, by the way, when I'm talking about IR, I mean international relations, the subfield of political science. From the beginning of IR as an academic discipline, IR theories dealt always with international organization, often in a rather critical way. One of the very early citations we find by Lorimer, who is an international lawyer from the 19th century. Here he said international organization has thus no substantive value. It is not an end in itself, it is sought for the sake of national organizations alone. This is the basic, by the way, a basic understanding of realist thinking as well. International organization is seen as both the overall organization of the international, for example, or in particular world politics, and international organizations as an institutionalized form. You remember what I told you in the last presentation when I was talking about different notions of international organization. The one is international organization as a kind of order, organization of the international world politics, and the other is the institutionalized form, this kind of international organizations that we were talking about, such as the United Nations, WTO, World Bank, etc. IR theories, international relation theories, however, emphasize states and the relations among states. This is what I was talking about earlier on too. It's mainly about the state and interstate system and the ways how IOs interfere or influence this kind of interstate system. Besides states, however, international organizations and other non-state actors such as non-governmental organizations are of growing importance in world politics. Thus, IR theories are mainly interested in the relations between states and IOs, how the one interferes the others, how international organizations can interfere the relations among states. IR theories describe various roles of international organizations vis-à-vis states. They can be either seen as instruments, arenas, actors, or bureaucracies. I have to make one remark at this point. Usually, or one way, and probably the more conservative way of talking about international organizations in a theoretical sense would be to go through all the IR theories, or the most dominant IR theories, and analyze what is the role of international organizations according to the theory. So we then would talk about realism, neorealism, offensive and defensive realism. We will talk about liberalism, neo-institutionalism, regime theory, social constructivism, feminism, Marxism, and so on and so forth. So we would talk about all the other different theoretical accounts and approaches and how they conceptualize international organization. I think this would be A, boring, and B, unnecessary because of basically one reason. What we can identify is, when we are interested in international organizations, in the concept of international organization, what we can identify is there are certain roles or certain metaphors assigned or identified with, in which IOs are identified. So, for example, the metaphor of an instrument is something that is shared in all realist theories. No matter what, it is classical realism, it is neorealism, it is defensive or offensive realism. It is, by the way, also a metaphor that is shared in Marxism. In Marxism, international organizations are also seen as instruments, but not for states, but rather for the bourgeoisie. So this is a way to, this is so to speak a different path to theoretically conceptualize international organizations. So we are not going through all the theories, we are rather going through different ways how a number of theories are describing or studying international organizations. And these are the four metaphors that are most important in that field. I would probably say the first three are the most important, the classical metaphors of international organizations, which is instrument, arena, and actor. The metaphor as a bureaucracy or organization is a rather recent one. It means it is from the last 10 to 15 years, whereas instrument, arena, and actor are rather established metaphors about the last 50, 60 years probably. So we are starting with international organizations as instruments. According to the realist school, IOs are instruments for states. Simple as that. The realist school here encompasses theories like classical realism, neorealism, offensive and defensive realism. But as I've said, this is also true for Marxism. For Marxism as well, IOs are instruments. The realist school starts from the observation that international politics politics are characterized by anarchy, by the absence of government, order, hierarchy, but it means no chaos instead. So anarchy here, the notion of anarchy, the idea of anarchy means that there is no such thing as order, but we have a group of equals. The states are seen as equals, but there is no kind of order among the states. There's no hierarchy of states, there is no rules states follow, there is no guiding principle, nothing. The states exist alongside each other. Realism refers to Hobbes' understanding on the state of nature. The state of nature, according to Hobbes, is a war of all against all, in which human beings constantly seek to destroy each other in an incessant pursuit for power. Life in this state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short, according to Hobbes. And this understanding of the state of nature by Hobbes is translated to the state of nature among states. Not the states are like the individuals, like the people in the state of nature of what Hobbes is talking about. States are seen as the human beings that are constantly seeking to destroy each other. The states are against each other as wolves. Realism translates, so to speak, Hobbes' understanding of mankind and the state of nature to states. And here we have some heads of realism and neorealism. On the left, we have Morgenthau as the classical godfather of realism, of classical realism. We have Kenneth Waltz, and we have John Mearsheimer as representatives of rather defensive and offensive realism or neorealism. And in this understanding of international organization as instruments, or this understanding of the realist school, states are the primary, if not the only actors in the system. States are unitary, rational actors, they are acting in a rational way, and they are seen as unitary entities. So there's no discussion in realism which groups of government or of NGOs or other interest groups in the state might act or push the state into a certain direction. It is all about states as a unitary entity. All states, according to realism, are similar. They must pursue power to survive. States' primary goal is to survive in an unsecure environment. There's a permanent threat of being attacked. And let's stop here just for a moment and try to illustrate this, because this understanding of the state and of how states exist in world politics is an understanding that we read and see all the time, not just in international politics, but if we read newspapers or even if you watch TV shows. Some of you might know the TV show Game of Thrones. Have you ever heard of it, or is it not popular in Russia? Has anybody seen or known the TV show Game of Thrones? No? Yes?
We heard about.
Okay, you don't watch this kind of stuff. It's quite popular in, I would say, in Germany, and most students like it when I'm talking about this kind of stuff. But then imagine a different situation. Imagine you go home on a Saturday night after being in a bar or at a party. You go home alone through a dark park, and then you see a group of people approaching you. This is exactly the fear, the anxiousness that states have in the international system, because you do not know what happens next. There can happen nothing, you just pass by, this is it, or somebody or the group can threaten you, can, I don't know, rape you or whatever. And this is exactly this understanding that realism has here, or that realism puts in front here. The state never knows what the other states want or do not want to do. And this is why you have to be prepared. This is why every state has to be prepared. You cannot refer or or hope that other states will help you. You cannot hope that there is an international organization helping you. You have to help yourself. This is the classic idea of realism that is conceptualizing states in a self-help system. Not other states will help you, not a coalition of states will help you, you just have to help yourself. Therefore, states concentrate on capabilities of others and not on the intentions of other states. Other states can they might have a friendly intention, or they can pretend to be friendly, they can pretend to help you, they can pretend to work together with you in an international organization, but you can never be sure about that. You can never know whether a state, whether the group of states will really help you if help is needed. Therefore, the intentions always remain unclear, opaque. You cannot know them. What you can know, or what you can detect, are the capabilities of other states. And you can think of other states having all the time an offensive potential. They can put a threat on you, they can attack you, and this is why you in each and every state has to care for its own security first, according to realism. Therefore, international politics, according to realism, is more important than domestic politics, because if the state's security is not guaranteed, there is no need to talk about domestic politics. Then there would be no more state. This is why realism argues that international politics is more important than domestic politics. And relative gains are more important than absolute gains. I'm coming to this point later on when I'm comparing realism and liberalism. John Mearsheimer is famous for many quotes, but this is one of his most famous. In an anarchic world of international politics, it is better to be a Godzilla than Bambi. It's better to be powerful than having less power. Otherwise, there is the danger to being overruled, to being attacked. So prepare yourself, try to be a Godzilla, and don't try to be Bambi. Don't try to be too friendly, too harmless. Realists claim that in order to understand international politics, it is necessary to understand which states are the most powerful and what their interests are. Even though, I have said that earlier, even though the intentions are unclear, you try or should try to find out what the interest of a state might be, and in particular, how powerful the state is. Power is the study of who gets what and how. Put simply, the most powerful states control international politics. And this is actually where I wanted to give this example of Game of Thrones, which I've mentioned earlier. There's a nice scene in the first season of Game of Thrones when there's a dispute between two characters, Littlefinger and Cersei, when Littlefinger is telling her that he found out that knowledge is power. If you know something about somebody, this is a certain kind of power that you have. And then she advised her guards to kill him, to seize him first, and then she says, kill him, and then she says, stop, I changed my mind. And then she tells him, while the guard's still holding the knife to his neck, and she tells him, only power is power. And this is exactly what realism means. Only power is power. When realists talk about power, they usually mean military power. They're not talking about economic power, about cultural power, or whatever kind of power you might think of. The only power most of the classical realists are thinking about is military power. Full stop. As a result of this, states are always worried that they will be attacked. The rational response to this is to arm or to form alliances. These are the two options a state has. Either it could arm, it could be better prepared if a conflict arises, if an attack comes, or it could try to form alliances. However, alliances are critical. Alliances is not something that is positively denoted in realism. Alliances are critical because you never know whether the alliance really holds what it's promises. So for example, even if states form an alliance, such as NATO for example, if one of the states is attacked in NATO, all the other states have to help the attacked state. This is the basic idea of NATO. However, a state never knows whether all the other states really comply, and whether they would help if a state is attacked or not. So this is a rather risky strategy to form alliances. It's always the better way to get armed. This is what most realists would argue for. But not each and every state has the potential to be a Godzilla, so to speak. Some just cannot arm as much as others, because they simply do not have the men, they do not have the money to buy the weapons, and so on and so forth. So alliances is the second strategy to prepare yourself in the case of war. However, such behavior causes other states to worry. And this is another idea of realism, the so-called security dilemma. Because other states observe whether states arm or disarm. And as I've said earlier, armament of other states is always seen and observed as a threat for their own state. So what follows next is if you observe a state that is arming, you increase your armament. So this is observed again by the original state, and another armament takes place, and so on and so forth. So this is the idea of the security dilemma, that even if you try to increase your security by armament, that could, in the long run, relate to or bring you to a situation in which you find yourself weaker than the moment before. This is exactly what took place in the Cold War, in the first decades of the Cold War. I would say until the 1980s, roughly speaking. Stability, because this is something you might wonder, why can't we or don't we observe much more wars in world politics? We see, apart from some wars, usually stability. And stability then can be explained by the balance of power. The balance of power is a situation in which no country is powerful enough to control all the other countries. Another metaphor for the balance of power is the so-called billiard ball model. The billiard ball model means that you translate all the states in the world into billiard balls. There are bigger balls, like Russia, like China, like the United States. There are smaller balls, like Germany, France, Spain. And there are very, very tiny balls, like, I don't know, Ecuador, Burkina Faso, or Albania, or whatever. So you have, depending on the power of state, you have bigger and smaller balls. Then you imagine all the balls laying on a billiard ball table. And in a certain moment, there are no movements on the table. But if one ball, even the smallest ball, is pushed very hardly on the table, then a few other balls will necessarily have to move. And this is exactly the understanding of the balance of power. You have the balance of power if all the balls on the table are laying in their position. And the balance of power is destroyed or takes some time to create a new balance of power if only one of these balls is pushed. And you can imagine if a bigger ball is pushed, then probably all the balls on the table will have to move somehow. Whereas when a smaller ball is pushed even very, very hard, then sometimes bigger balls have to move a bit, but they are moving not that quickly and they don't change their position, not that heavily as they would have if a bigger ball would be moved. So this is basically the understanding of the balance of power. You have the balance of power on the table if no pushes take place. According to world politics, the most powerful, according to this understanding again, of world politics as an anarchic system in which states are the unitary, rational actors, in which states do not, or in which states rather arm themselves instead of forming alliances. In this kind of system, the most powerful states create and shape institutions so that they can maintain their share of world power or even increase it. This is the one central understanding of Mersheimer in this case. So if we have international institutions, if we have international organizations, then the states in the system would form these international organizations and international institutions in a way that the power of the state is being increased, not decreased. In other words, states would comply with the rules of an international organization as long as the rules are helpful for the state. If the rules are not helpful anymore, if states cannot increase their power by following the rules, they would simply quit. They would simply leave the international organization. An international organization, according to realism, is nothing more than being a member in a sports club. You can pay money to the sports club, go playing football, go dancing or whatever, but you can simply quit your membership. If you don't like it anymore, just quit, get out. This is the basic understanding of realists on international organizations. IOs are therefore seen as means or instruments to states. States use IOs to pursue their own goals. Or, in other words, by Mersheimer, institutions largely mirror the distribution of power in the system. So, if we look at international organizations, we can see, for example, in the voting powers, how the power in the international world is distributed. One example for this would be the World Bank or the IMF. In the World Bank and in the IMF, for example, can only pass a decision. In the World Bank and IMF, this is something I have to tell you first. We have a weighted voting system. So that each and every country has the same vote, not one country, one vote, but the country that pays more gets more votes. A vote or a decision can only be passed if 80% of the votes are in favor of the decision. The United States are holding 15.7% of the weighted votes in World Bank and IMF. In other words, even if all the other countries in the World Bank and even if all the other countries in the IMF would opt for one decision, if the United States do not agree, it cannot be passed. Because the United States are holding more than 50% of the weighted voting power. We have other international organizations such as the World Trade Organization or the United Nations, where there is one state, one vote. There's a different kind. But we have weighted voting in World Bank and IMF, for example. So this could be seen as an illustration for this third point, that institutions largely mirror the distribution of power in the system. Examples are, as I've said, the UN Security Council, where we have also kind of weighted voting because we have the veto powers, the 5 veto powers, and the other members of the Security Council, and all the other members change every 2 years. So we just have the permanent 5, which have the veto power, and all the other states in the world are sometimes part of the UN Security Council, but most of the time they are not part of the Security Council. And the United States have been seen as using the UN Security Council as a means, for example, for their foreign policy in the 1970s. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, has been seen as a means for China to gain influence in Africa and Latin America. How does this take place? Well, it's basically a mirror organization to the World Bank, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. And China usually does things like building a railroad between African cities like Nairobi and what is the capital of Tanzania again? Mombasa. Between Nairobi and Mombasa, they built a railroad. They built the railroad by Chinese workers, get the money from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and afterwards they tell the Tanzanian and the Tanzanian government to pay for it. And if the Tanzanian government doesn't have the money to pay for it, they say, no problem, you can pay us in land or in any other natural resources. We take everything. Or in Venezuela, they built a harbor by the money of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank by Chinese workers, and afterwards they prepare the check and say, okay, Venezuela, you have to pay this amount of money, and if Venezuela cannot pay, they simply say, no problem at all, just pay us in oil. So this is the way how China currently tries to rule via the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. But this is not a reason to blame China. I mean, it's exactly the way how the World Bank has been used by the United States in the 1980s and even in the 1990s. So this is the way how states can use international organizations to their own ends. Are there any questions on this first metaphor, international organizations as instruments?
Ребята, может быть, по-русски попробуйте.
Exactly.
Просто мы попробуем перевести.
You can raise questions in Russian as well. My ability to understand Russian is very limited to da, niet, davai, raboti. I guess this is it. So if you have a more complicated question, somebody has to translate it. Otherwise, I'm lost.
No questions.
All good. Okay, let's move on. The second metaphor I'm talking about today is the metaphor of an arena. According to the liberal school, also are arenas or fora for states. You can think about the very notion of an arena or fora in the sense of the Latin word. Yeah, you have a place where people can meet. And the international organization is nothing else than just the place where the people can meet. Or transferred or translated here again to international organizations and states. International organizations are the places where the states can meet. Full stop. Nothing else. The liberal school here encompasses theories like liberalism, various kinds of institutionalisms like neoliberal institutionalism, historical institutionalism, economic institutionalism, regime theory, and so on and so forth. So all the number of liberal approaches are here combined under the frame of the so-called liberal school. This liberal school shares many assumptions, this is interesting, shares many assumptions of the realist school. For example, that the international system, meaning the system of states, is characterized by anarchy. This is also an assumption in the liberal as well as in the realist school. States are the most important actors. This is also true for liberal school as well as for the realist school. It is disputed somehow in the liberal school whether states are unitary actors. Some say so, others rather concentrate on interest group within states that makes states do something or don't do something. States are again rational, self-interested and utility maximizing actors. And similarly to the realist school, uncertainty pervades relations between states. In the realist school, this uncertainty is bridged by armament and alliances. In the realist school, states have to arm or to form alliances to bridge this uncertainty that results from the fact that you do not know what all the other states want, but you can assume the worst case that the other states won't attack you. And this uncertainty also prevails in the liberal school. The liberal school refers mainly to Immanuel Kant, but Kant believes, contrary to Hobbes, Kant believes that reason is the source of morality, and that people are endowed with reason. The German term would be vernunftbegabt. Maybe there are no Germans in the room. But you are able to work reasonably, so to speak. You are able, you have the ability to think in a reasonable way. Similarly to realism, that relates to Hobbes, liberalism transforms this understanding, Kant's understanding of human beings to interstate relation. In other words, states can be able to make reasonable decisions. This means the following. If we translate this understanding, it means the following for international organization and the concept of states. First of all, the state as such has no interest. States cannot have any interest at all. States can have interests. A leader of a government can have an interest. A governmental party can have an interest. An enterprise, an NGO, all these things can have interests, but not a state has an interest. So there's a number of different interests within a state, and the kind of interest that the state is representing depends on the power of the groups within the state. This is one of the findings or one of the results you can get from the Kantian perspective on international organization. In other words, the people and the interest groups within a state drive the state and drive the state's interests, or the interest the states represent. Interests here are mainly understood as economic interests, whereas in realism we are talking mostly about security, about power. Here we are mostly talking about interest in an economic sense, simply to make more money, to increase the wealth of a nation. This is the basic question, the basic idea of states in an international system according to the liberal school. The state protects and guarantees individual properties such as home, land and money, and establishes an internal state order. This is the basic role, the basic understanding and responsibility of a state, to guarantee individual properties plus establish an internal order for all human beings in the interest group. Cooperation among states is possible and reasonable, in particular because states can receive gains by cooperating. By doing cooperations with other states, states can gain more money, can become more wealthy. And this is the basic central understanding and the central reason why states should cooperate, because it increases the wealth of a nation.
Excuse me, Professor, I need to change video tape.
Oh, good? Okay. So, the reason why states, I'm just moving a bit around because I hate to stand still all the time. The reason why states should try to build an international organization is being explained by the prisoner's dilemma. Most of you should be aware of it or have heard about the prisoner's dilemma, right? If not, this is basically how it works. You have two members which are arrested, two potential prisoners. Each prisoner is in a solitary cell with no communication to each other. The prosecutor lacks sufficient evidence to convict the pair on the principal charge, but they have enough to convict both on a lesser charge. Simultaneously, the prosecutors offer each prisoner a bargain. This is actually what you find. This is actually what you find in every police TV show that you watch, right? You have two convicts in two separate cells, and then you see the policeman, the police officer going to one cell and telling them, okay, if you confess right now, you can go free or go on a lesser charge, but the other one has to go for a long time to jail. And you tell them that we exactly tell the other guy exactly the same thing, and if he talks first, then you go for a long time to jail. So this is the basic idea. Each prisoner is given the opportunity either to betray the other by testifying that the other committed the crime, or to cooperate with the other by remaining silent. The offer is, if A and B each betray the other, each of them serves 2 years in prison. If A betrays B, but B remains silent, A will be set free and B will serve 3 years in prison, and vice versa. So if B betrays A and the other way around, if A and B both remain silent, both of them will only serve 1 year in prison. So what we can see here very clearly is the best solution for A and B would be to stay silent. Because then both will go to jail for a short time, but only for a short time. You cannot be sure whether one of the two betrays the other, and this is exactly the hook or the angle the policeman takes. This is the bite the policeman takes and gives the two convicts in the cells, that if the one betrays the other, you get a chance to get out earlier, and the other one has to serve a longer time. And we usually can illustrate this with the following slides. If the prisoner 1 stays silent and prisoner 2 stays silent, both serve 1 year. This is the best option for both of them. If P talks, prisoner 2 talks, but prisoner 1 stays silent, then prisoner 1 has to go to jail for 3 years, prisoner 2 gets free. This is the other way around. And this is the worst case, that both talk. So the ideal solution would be this one. But most of them would choose that one. And the question is, how can we bring the prisoners to do this one, to get to this point? And this is exactly the same for states, or this can be easily translated to states. The prisoner's dilemma, and this is the way how liberal theory uses the prisoner's dilemma. We have two states, each state can decide whether to arm or to disarm. And this is the perfect example with the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Both countries can decide either to arm or to disarm. To disarm would be the perfect solution for both states, because you don't have to invest money, you don't have to invest into people. You have more money you can spend for, I don't know, education, for example, for universities, which I find really fantastic. To spend more money is to get better paid for you. Constantly, you would agree, right? If the university staff would be better paid, it would be a real advantage. You can invest your money in infrastructure or whatever. But the states usually decide to arm. And both states decide to arm. And this leaves both states in a weaker, or at least in a weak position. Because you always observe the other states arming, and then you have to arm yourself again to have this equilibrium between the two states. This is why both states armed. And in case there would be an agreement for both states that they should disarm, but only the one state disarms, but the other state arms, this would leave the state that disarmed in a definitely weaker position. So these are probably the worst cases for both states. And in order not to get into one of the worst cases, the states usually choose both to arm. And the idea of liberalism is that we should find solutions to bring them from this cell to this cell. And here the answer is international institution or international organization. The idea is to find international organizations that can do exactly this, to move from this cell to that cell. And this is what happened, for example, in the Cold War with the agreements to disarm the nuclear weapons in the 1980s, right? You have this institution, you have the contract, and you have an institution that observes that really both countries disarm. Then you have to find someone like the institution that is at least somehow or accepted and seen as being neutral, as being able to observe whether really both states follow their agreements. And if not, well, then they can raise a complaint, and then it can go back to this prisoner's dilemma. But as long as it stays the same way, as long as the states comply with the regulations, it is the better solution. This is exactly the answer that the liberal school gives on the creation of international institutions and international organizations. By the way, if I'm talking about international institutions in general, This is again an issue about notions, but in the liberal school, as well as in many, not all, but in many articles in the field of international relations, we have the we simply have an equation between international organizations and institutions. So there's no difference in using the either word or the other. International institutions are mostly seen as international organizations. This is why the theory is also called an institutionalist theory. However, the term international institution encompasses international regimes, such as a set of contracts and so on, and norms and rules, procedures, how to decide, but not, this is the difference between an international regime and an organization, but not a secretariat, for example, or an organ that is dealing with all these issues. And an international institution can also be just an international agreement or an international contract. So international institution is somehow a broader term than just talking about international organizations. However, in most articles, in most books on international institutions, when it comes to the examples are clearly international organizations. So this is just to clarify this term. If states, coming back to this understanding now, if states exist in an uncertain, unpredictable, and insecure environment, then cooperation on the basis of common rules, norms, practices, decision-making procedures, and so on, increases stability and helps states to overcome uncertainty. This is exactly the uncertainty we were talking about earlier. This is the uncertainty here. Because states are uncertain whether the other states arms or doesn't arm. The states choose to arm. The United States and the Soviet Union in the Cold War choose to arm, at least until the 1980s. If you have an institution, this is the basic idea, if you have an institution, this uncertainty can be overcome. And this brings all states into a better position. Institutions, what do institutions do? Well, institutions collect information about states and often make judgments about compliance and non-compliance. This is very important. They have to observe whether states follow exactly what they have agreed upon. And they have made this information public. They have to tell all the other states, they have to tell all the other members of an international organization what is going on. This is, for example, taking place in the WTO. The WTO observes whether all the other states follow the regulations, follow the norms, follow the procedures all the states have agreed upon. And if some states threaten or harm these regulations, then they can even sue the harming states or the states that has been harmed by the new regulations. This is something very particular to the WTO. There are other institutions that have this kind of dispute settlement and judgment as well, but this is something like an improvement of the WTO since 1994. What can institutions offer? Well, institutions reduce transaction costs and increase the reliability of expectations. These are very, very important points. This is some kind of, well, take-away message for the liberal school. So why are there institutions? Because of basically two reasons. First of all, it reduces transaction costs. Transaction cost means if we don't have an international institutions, each and every state has to take care of all the information processing, information delivering that an international institution is usually giving you. So you as a state have to observe all the other states. Do all the other states comply to a certain rule, to a certain procedure? Do they really disarm their nuclear weapons, or do they just pretend to do so but don't really do it? You as a state have to detect this information. If you have an international institution dealing with this, then it reduces your costs. Secondly, it increases the reliability of expectations. If you have certain rules, if you have certain norms, then these rules and norms establish some kind of action frame. This is a frame in which of which you can observe whether all the other partners, whether all the other members really stick into that frame, follow the rules, regulations, procedures, and so on, or whether they move outside the frame. I'm not saying that international institutions can then judge or can prosecute or put any kind of, I don't know, of harm or threat to the non-complying state, but at least they can observe whether a state is complying or not complying. So this makes the probability of reliance and reliability much higher than having no international institution. And this leads to cooperation gains for all parties, as costs are reduced for each state that is part of an international institution. In the long run, therefore, institutions may stabilize international relations as they offer a forum or an arena where states can negotiate and find agreements, facilitated by an institutional setting, which is something like the agenda, the venue, the procedures, the rules, the norms, etc. So what I'm not saying, let me just check. Okay. What I'm not saying is that that international institutions or international organizations act in a specific sense. They are not equal to states. They are not the new sovereigns. They are not actors in this metaphor, in this understanding. What international institutions do is they offer a frame, they offer a forum or an arena where states can negotiate. And what they offer in addition is they give you the agenda, so they say what are the issues that are going to be discussed. Where are we going to discuss these issues? How can we reach an agreement? So what are the decisional or the voting practices? What are the rules? What are the norms? This is exactly, by the way, this is exactly what's taking place in the United Nations General Assembly. When all the states can talk for a certain time, when there's a clear regulation, who can speak first, who is next, and so on and so forth. And this rotates every year. So it's not always, say, I don't know, the United States first or Russia first or whatever, but it rotates. Sometimes even the smallest countries are the first to talk. So this is a clear understanding of a common rule, of a common procedure, of a way how to reach an agreement. This is exactly what international organizations do according to the liberal school. Okay? So there's as you can imagine, there's a dispute between the realist school and the liberal school. The ones see international organizations as instruments, the others see them as arenas. The ones say international organizations have no meaning whatsoever because it's just the states. States use international organizations for their own ends. The others say, well, international organizations can be good international organizations can be good, can be helpful for international relations because they offer a frame, they offer an arena where states can negotiate. So it leads to stabilizing, to more peace in international relations. And the liberal school also says, well, I also offer gains for cooperating states. So it's curious why states wouldn't cooperate. It offers real gains in terms of money, for example, offers real gains in terms of money because you don't have to pay the transaction cost that you usually have to pay if you wouldn't have the international organization. If there wouldn't be an international organization, for example, on trade, like the WTO, each and every state has to make has to find certain ways how to deal with all the other states. Has to define the tariffs, has to define the non-tariff conditions, and so on and so forth. So this would be one state with 193 other states of defining how we can organize our economic relations, our trade relations. And this would have been done for each and every state. This is a lot of costs. A lot of transaction costs because they have to hire all the experts, they have to deal with a certain kind of contract or the way of how to do trade with other states. If we have this kind of international organization, it's much cheaper for states because you have common rules to which all other states follow, and most of them, by the way, comply. And then it's much easier, it brings much more wealth for all states, for all countries. So this is the rationale and the reason, according to the liberal school, why we have international organizations. The realist school, however, answers that states don't want absolute but relative gains. And this is very, very important because realism here argues that states are not interested to make more money, to make more wealth, but to make more wealth compared to others. So they are always comparing how much is the other state getting. Am I still the more important state? States want to improve their status vis-à-vis other states, even though these states are partners, friends, or whatever. This can best be done. If I would have a board, I could write it down. If you imagine two states, state A and B. Say state A has the power of 20, state B has the power of 10, right? So state A is twice as powerful than state B. State A has the power of 20, state B has the power of 10, then state A is twice as powerful as state B. Agree? Okay. Then imagine there is kind of cooperation between two states. And both states are making gains out of the cooperation. And say, just as an example, say that the kind of power or wealth they are gaining is plus 10. Then state A, without cooperation, is 20, with cooperation is 30, right? Because plus 10. This is how the cooperation increases the gain for the state. State B had the power of 10, now has the power of 20, right? Because both states are gaining plus 10. It was 20, 10 first, now it's 30, 20. Realists would now argue that state A loses. The relative gains of state B are decreasing. Because in the beginning, state A was twice as powerful than state B. Now, state A, after cooperation, is not twice as powerful anymore. It's just 50% more powerful than state B. So in fact, the power of state A is decreasing due to cooperation. And this is the reason that realists would, or this is the way that realists would argue states would not make corporations if they lose or if they don't get the relative gains. It's not important to make absolute gains, it's important to make the relative gains. To stay at least twice as powerful or even better this ratio for your own ends. This is the basic reason here, or the basic dispute between realism and liberalism. Okay, that was a bit longer than expected. The idea was in the beginning, Konstantin, that we can have a short discussion right now, then we can have another very short break, and then it's another presentation. But I don't know how long I can go today. It was set until 2:30, right? The presentation altogether, the lecture today, until 2:30, right?
До половины второго у нас время?
Нет,
До двух?
14:10 где-то еще получается, когда у нас
We have 30 minutes. 30 minutes.
30 minutes left.
Yes, left. 30 minutes.
No, we have 30 minutes.
Yeah, so there's another 30 minutes, but then I have to stop.
Yes.
That's a problem, but not your problem, it's fine. Okay, I suggest, in that case, I move on. We spare the discussion for the end of the lecture. I just would like to mention 2-3 points, but then I move on to the presentation. 2 or 3 points. The concept of the state is here very important when we compare the both theories. Because if we see states as rational actors that are able to analyze the power of other states, and they can really measure how powerful other states are, they can really measure how much power one state could gain from cooperation, then I would argue that the realists have the better arguments on their side. But this only holds true if you think that states are really able to do so. Most people would say that it's not possible. It's not possible to do that. It's not possible to measure the power of a state. What would that be, by the way? You can probably measure the military power of a state. You can measure how much tanks the state has, how much planes, aircraft and so on, how much soldiers the state has. This is something you could probably measure. But what does it tell you about how good soldiers can fight? Or what about the tactics and things like that? These are things you cannot measure. Plus, you cannot measure the intentions and the things that states really want to do. A perfect illustration for this is that, well, for example, I cannot measure, or I cannot tell why you are here. I cannot see your intentions for that. It might be the case that you are just interested in the lecture. It might be the case that somebody forced you to be here. It might be the case that, I don't know, you are in love in the person sitting right next to you. There can be different reasons, different intentions to do something, what you do. But usually these intentions are opaque. They cannot be seen. They cannot be unveiled. Even under torture. For example, I don't know, for example, I would torture you in order to find out why you are exactly here. Then probably you would give me the answer that you think I would like to hear. Then you would probably say, because this is the most exciting lecture I've ever heard, and this is why I'm here, right? So I think it's very difficult to find out what people really want, and this is why at least critical scholars would argue that it's difficult to find out the intentions of states or statesmen. I mean, try to find out what Donald Trump really wants. It is, I assume it is impossible. You cannot detect that. This is at least an argument that could be made here. Well, we can go to the questions later on, but just to illustrate where the problem here is. It's the concept of the state. I also factors. Well, a variety of approaches coming from very different kinds of schools see international organizations as actors, such as the global governance approaches, the constructivism, the principal agents, and so on. So it's not a school instead of realist school or liberal school. It is rather a bunch of different approaches, all conceptualizing, all seeing international organizations as actors. However, the part they are acting is highly contested, so it's not clear actors to what extent, so to speak. There are at least two different kinds of actorhood that can be differentiated. IOs can be seen as supporting actors of member states, so they have not a primary role, but a supporting role for states as the main actors, or international organizations can itself be seen as protagonists besides states. IOs as supporting actors, this is an idea that is delivered, for example, by principal agent rules. States, in this model, states are still the main actors, the principals, in international relations, but they use IOs as agents to take over specific functions and tasks. Don't mix this up with the realist thinking. There is kind of a similar vocabulary, because states are the principals, but IOs are really agents here. They deliver a certain task, they take over a certain active role, but this role, this task, has been delegated by states. So states are not using international organizations as their means for their own ends, but rather delegate a certain task, a certain function to international organization, and give international organization the discretion to carry out these tasks in the way they want to carry it out. IOs are therefore endowed with a certain degree of autonomy to fulfill the functions and tasks they were assigned by the principles. PA, principal agent theory, deals with the phenomenon that the agents, the IOs, are not acting the way the actors intended, and therefore scrutinize the tools principals can employ to rein in errant behavior by IO agents. So the principal agent theory is not that much interested in this delegation between the principal and the agent. PA theory is rather interested in the way when IOs are not behaving in the way the principals want them to behave or want them to act. And then principal agent theories are discussing about certain ways or means and tools to bring IOs back on track, so to speak. So this is the basic understanding of international organizations here. In this case, international organizations are seen as supporting actors. So they are not main actors, they are not playing a main part to stay into the metaphor, but they are playing an additional part, a supporting part for member states. IOs as protagonists besides states is an understanding that is delivered, first and foremost, I should say, in global governance approaches. Global governance here means governing without sovereign authority, relationships that transcend national frontiers. This is a term very popular, I would say, in the last 20 to 25 years. And the idea is that there's a kind of governance, a kind of governing taking place without states. There is a governance beyond the state level. Governance here is the sum of the many ways individuals and institutions, public and private, manage their common affairs. It is a continuing process through which conflicting or diverse interests may be accommodated and cooperative action may be taken. It includes formal institutions and regimes empowered to enforce compliance, as well as informal arrangements that people and institutions either have agreed to or perceive to be in their interest. Saying, well, this is, I have to admit that this is a complicated kind of definition, but it means there is this kind of rule-making, this kind of organizing the world beyond the level of the nation state. Even individuals can contribute to this kind of order. NGOs can contribute to this kind of order. For example, NGOs usually do that by standard setting. There are certain standards in the world that we all take for granted, such as, I don't know, this standard boxes here. This is kind of standard that we agree more or less upon, right? Not each and every country has its own standards how projectors are run or how mobile phones work. There's not each and every country or each and every company has its own standard, but rather they agree on certain standards and certain norms. This is a way of governance which is meant here. So NGOs or multinational enterprises are standard setters. Individuals can be standard setters. In particular, individuals from academia can be standard setters. For example, when they define certain terms and bring states to follow these terms. So there are various ways of how international organizations, of how NGOs, of how individuals can contribute to this kind of global governance. And as I've said, one way of governing the global is by setting standards and norms. IOs are here understood as pieces of this global governance. So they are not making the whole bunch of global governance. There are individuals, NGOs, and so on and so forth, part or acting in global governance, but IOs are one piece of global governance. The cooperative problem-solving arrangements and activities that the states and other actors have put into place to deal with various issues and problems. This is what IOs can do. And they can act in various ways. For example, they can support international cooperation. This is something that we find already in the liberal school. By offering a venue, by offering the procedures, the data, the information, the decision-making rules, and so on and so forth. This is one way how international organizations can act, so to speak, as they offer certain things for cooperation. They can be norm-entrepreneurs, lawmakers, or norm-diffusion agencies. Norm-entrepreneurs is if they develop or invent a certain norm. There can be lawmakers in the case of the World Trade Organization. I'm speeding up a bit because I know we have, I don't know, probably only 25 to 20 minutes left. Like in the case of the World Trade Organization. There can be non-diffusion agencies. For example, the UNESCO is sometimes seen as a non-diffusion agency because it is, so to speak, teaching states how to work with their curriculum. So if you go throughout the world, you can see that that the curriculum for mathematics, for example, doesn't vary, no matter where you go to school. No matter if you go to school in Russia, in Moscow or Vladivostok, or in Botswana, or in Germany, or in a city in the Midwest of the United States, the curriculum in mathematics stays basically the same. This is also true for the curriculum in geography, or the curriculum in, I don't know, well, probably not for the mother language, for the mother tongue in the country, but there are various forms of curricula that are more or less the same all over the world. And the way how these curriculums are implemented are taught by somehow, or to a certain extent, by the UNESCO. So this is why international organizations can be non-diffusion agencies. International organizations can monitor the implementation of norms. This is something we have talked about in the case of the World Trade Organization, for example, or it's also true in the case of the European Union. In very rare cases, international organizations have a real sanctioning power. We can talk about this power when it comes to the United Nations Security Council, when it comes to the European Commission. These are two institutions or two organizations that have a certain kind of sanctioning power, but usually sanctioning power is not what make most international organizations as actors. However, international organizations can legitimize a certain action of a state. This is another way how international organizations can act. For example, if a state wants to attack, and this is something that, well, in the last or in the latest years, this is something that the United States had sometimes done. If they want to attack, if they want to do a military operation, they usually have to have a resolution by the United Nations Security Council. They want to get their action being a legitimate action. They don't want to see it as an illegitimate kind of war. And this is why they were pushing these resolutions through the United Nations Security Council in order to see their action as being legitimate. And further on, international organizations can itself be, or themselves be brokers and mediators. They can help to settle disputes. This is something I told you earlier on. This is something which is taking place in the World Trade Organization, having besides its GATT and GATS, having a dispute settlement mechanism that should prevent states from carrying out trade wars against each other. Then we can talk about international organizations as orchestrators, which is another illustration or another specification of the actor model. Orchestration is seen as the facilitation and coordination of intermediate actors on a voluntary basis by providing them with material, ideational support in order to achieve governance goals with respect to target actors. In other words, IOs orchestrators, like abbreviated with O, coordinate private actors such as NGOs as intermediaries, abbreviated by the I, to improve regulation of other private actors such as firms as the target team. So this is why it's called the OIT model, the orchestrator, intermediary, and target. To provide public services such as emergency relief or to enhance the IO governance role in interstate relations. An example is the UN HCR again, the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, as the orchestrator who coordinates NGOs in the field of refugee support, such as health, education, food security, shelter, and so on, to help refugees from Syria, for example, in Turkey. So this is an idea of the OIT model. Orchestration works by engaging private actors and working with them to achieve regulatory goals. So this as another specification. And finally, I also, as protagonist in constructivism. Constructivism, however, is rather an ontology than a theory. Constructivism highlights the idea of ideas, of norms and identities that matter. Meanings about the world are constructed according to constructivism rather than they are material. Material facts such as nuclear weapons can be both. They can be as a threat or they can be seen as an additional asset. To give you an example about this, what constructivism is telling us is that what we observe, or the way we perceive world politics, is a constructed way. It depends on the way how we construct this. Nuclear weapons, for example, is not necessarily a threat for a state. If another state has nuclear weapons, that does not necessarily mean a threat. If you have a certain friendship with that state, like the United States and the United Kingdom, or the United States and France, then the nuclear weapons of the United Kingdom or France are not a threat to the United States. They can be seen as a further asset against any other state or against an offender. However, nuclear weapons of China or North Korea or Iran are a real threat to the US right now. We can observe this right now in world politics. The potential that Iran might gain nuclear weapons or North Korea having nuclear weapons or gaining the potential to shoot nuclear weapons is a real threat for the United Nations and for the United States. So this is what constructivism tells us, that depending on how we see certain materials is how we make sense of it. This is why anarchy, this is a famous quote from Alexander Wendt, this is why anarchy is what states make of it. I assume this comes later on the slide. Anarchy is what states make of it. Anarchy is not something that forces states to do something like in realism or even in the liberalism. But anarchy is what states make out of it. There can be an anarchic international situation, but states could be friends, or states could be seen as, I don't know, as partners. But they can also in a way that they think about the consequences of the action. Sometimes they just follow the logic of appropriateness, so do what is seen to be appropriate. For example, why does not every state torture enemies or torture people in jail? This might be seen as a reasonable decision because it has usually no consequences for the state, and you might get additional information. Well, the simple answer the constructivism would give you is that the logic of appropriateness prevents states from doing that. Most states do not torture because they think that it's cruel and it's not appropriate. This is something that tells you, or this also tells you something about the identity of the state. States are seeing themselves as belonging to a certain kind of states, as righteous states, as states who are following certain rules, such as human rights or accrediting human rights. And Wendt then just said in 1992, if the United States, so right after the Cold War, if the United States and the Soviet Union decide that they are no longer enemies, the Cold War is over. It is not something that is carved in stone that the United States and the Soviet Union had been enemies in the Cold War. It's not something that is carved in stone, it's something that the states construct by themselves. If they decide that they will be no longer enemies, the Cold War is simply over. It is collective meanings that constitute the structure which organize our actions. Actors require identities, relatively stable, role-specific understanding and expectations about the self and the other by participating in such collective meaning. So, IOs as protagonists, according to the constructivist school or constructivist ontology, means that IOs can influence the identity of the state by developing and disseminating norms and observing norm compliance. IO can be, this was the example I gave you before, IOs can be teachers of norms. They can help states to comply with certain norms, to to realize norm compliance. IOs can be seen as the gentle civilizer of nations because it constructs, the IOs construct certain norms that states are going to follow, and this could lead to civilizing, or it can have a civilizing effect on nations. And IOs can generate an action frame for legitimate state behavior. This is something I told you earlier, that international organizations, even in the case of the liberal school, form a certain action frame. This does not mean necessarily that all the states follow the kind of action that are possible in the action frame. They can even behave outside the frame, but then it could be observed as a violation. Otherwise, if you don't have these rules, if you don't have this action frame, you cannot observe any violations. You cannot observe violation of human rights if you don't have any human rights. This is the simple conclusion. Okay, Konstantin, how much do I have? Are we over? 5 minutes. Well, that's difficult. It depends on you. I can tell you something about the last metaphor of bureaucracies, if you want to. This is another 2 or 3 slides. Or if you have any pressing questions, then go on with your questions. Depends a bit on you. What do you prefer? Questions? Go on. Okay, I go. I also, as bureaucracies is a rather recent term, whereas the theory of bureaucracy by Max Weber is an old one from 1922. The concept is now used by Barton, or was used by Barton Fillmore in 1999-2004, and leads to the kind of organizational term in the study of international organization, and this notion has been identified by Alice in 2010. IOs, according to this understanding, IOs are not just servants to whom states delegate, they are authorities in their own right, and that authority gives them autonomy vis-à-vis states. So they are authorities, and this authority gives them autonomy. And there are 4 different forms of IO authority. First, there is a rational legal authority. IOs have a specific form and are endowed to act in a specific way. And this endowment comes from the rules and the statutes of international organizations. They have a delegate authority that is delegated from states so that IOs can carry out certain functions, certain tasks, and so on. Again, by the statute or the legal contract of an international organization. International organizations can be moral authorities. IOs and bodies serve or protect some widely shared set of principles. They use these statutes as a basis of authoritative action. Think of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. To protect refugees is seen as something higher, moral, normative thing. So this is the kind of moral authority that international organizations in some cases have, like the UNHCR, because it says we are protecting refugees. This is something as a moral good, doing good to people. This is the moral authority. And finally, the expertise authority, specifically often technical knowledge to carry out very specific tasks. For example, nuclear proliferation is monitored by physicists and engineers. Pandemics are dealt with by public health specialists. So not each and everybody is working for an international organization. In some cases, you have to be an expert on your field. And this is how international organizations can have this expertise authority. IOs can use that authority and knowledge and rules to regulate and constitute the world in 3 different ways. Like, I assume I stop. Okay, I stop after the next 2 slides. First, they can classify the world, creating categories of problems, actors, and actions. All the WTO are categorizing national economies according to budget deficits, least and less income countries, and so on and so forth. So there's a certain way of categorizing the world, which is done by international organizations. International organizations are able to fix meaning in the social world. This is the example of the definition of a refugee, which is done by the UNHCR. Or they can articulate and diffuse new norms and rules, which is done, still be done by the World Bank with the idea of old age security. So to have an old age security system is a thing that the World Bank is articulating and diffusing as a new norm model across the world. Not each and every country has an old age security model in the past, but the World Bank then pops up and says, okay, you can only have this money if you establish some kind of old age security model. And we tell you exactly how this old age security model should look like. Or the World Bank only gives money if the countries that are receiving the money do something against corruption in their own country. So these are the ways how new norms and rules can be articulated, diffused, and stabilized. Following Barnett and Finnemore, this is the last slide, following Barnett and Finnemore more, IR scholars use insights from organization studies and sociology to think about IOs. And this, I could talk about another 3 hours just about this slide, or I can limit myself to 30 seconds, and I choose 30 seconds. So I'm just going through this point very briefly, although there could be said a lot of it. IOs can be analyzed as being embedded in or part of inter-organizational relations. The whole literature on opening international organizations for NGOs is part of this stuff. IOs can be seen as part of an organizational field, and then it is analyzed or why certain IOs are similar to others and others IOs are not. And the argument here given is it depends on the organizational field. Organizational learning and the change of international organizations is another subfield in which scholars are interested in how international organizations can learn, can get better, can manage the changes they are facing in a better way. Then another branch of research is dealing with the sources of IO autonomy, about the politicization of IOs. So international organizations are not just seen as mechanical means, but they are rather politicized actors. There is a political agenda behind some of the international organizations. Others are dealing with international organization and inter-organizational relations, so the way international organizations are functioning inside as an organization. Others are dealing with the world semantics of international organization. In other words, what kind of world are international organizations addressing if they talk about the world? This is a very interesting thing if you compare the maps international organizations are drawing. For example, if you compare the map of the World Bank of the world with the map of the WTO of the world, then you can see in the World Bank that certain countries in the world do not exist in the map of the World Bank. For example, the United States do not exist. Central Europe doesn't exist. Japan, Australia doesn't exist. Simply because of the reason, because these countries do not need money from the World Bank. They are not receiving countries. Poverty reduction is not seen as a problem in these countries. This is why these countries do not pop up in the world of the World Bank. The world of the WTO is a different world because it differentiates between those kind of countries that are making a lot of wealth from international trade and those countries that are doing not that good. So there are different concepts, different imaginations of the world. And finally, I also world organizations. This is a rather new concept that internally differentiates how international organizations can be studied and how this model of world organization can be applied to other kinds of institutions such as the G7 or formerly G8 or the G20. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any questions? No. Okay.